Okay, welcome to the SparkCognition webinar series. Today's presentation is how the future of cybersecurity depends on artificial intelligence. And in our case here today, we'll be talking a lot about machine learning, a subsection of artificial intelligence. My name is Rick Pither. I run cybersecurity sales here at SparkCognition. You can see my contact information there, both email and phone, which is mobile. If you've got any questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out. Happy to address any questions or provide the overall presentation. So what are we going to talk about today? Obviously, we need to do a SparkCognition introduction for the reason that it's a fairly new company and probably have not heard a lot about SparkCognition yet in the cybersecurity realm. We are most known for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing in global industrial Internet of Things. And we'll talk about kind of the portfolio here in a quick second, and then we'll get into the overall topic for today. So we will talk about how the adversary, obviously continues to evolve. That isn't anything new. But the question is, how fast are we evolving? I see there's a huge gap here in the ability for adversaries to move versus, a small, medium-sized business or an enterprise environment trying to protect itself. I'll question you, the listeners, if we're focused on the right things. There's a lot to cover in terms of protecting defense in depth and limiting your attack surface. I will venture to say that I think most companies are devoting a little bit too much prioritization or spend in the wrong areas, and I'll speak to that and show you kind of the numbers behind that hypothesis. And really, how do you weave or leverage machine learning inside your environment? If you talk to a lot of the security vendors that you probably have installed today, they all have artificial intelligence machine learning capabilities that have been added over the last probably 2 years. But the question is, how is that working? We think that there are some very generic algorithms and powerful algorithms, frankly, that can do a lot and can help improve. But if they're not the right algorithms, looking specifically for the problem that they should be created to look for, we see that there's still a huge gap, especially around brand new malware or something that your defenses haven't seen before. And then finally, we will cover our product called DeepArmor, which is an endpoint protection tool that does analysis, detection, and prevention of file-based, fileless attacks, and in memory, such as like PowerShell, before they are executed, right? So the goal is to protect and prevent an infection from happening. So let's quickly talk about the SparkCognition portfolio, because I do think it's very important, especially just to set kind of credibility and who are we and what are we talking about, and do we understand kind of this market. We see the emergence of silos kind of collapsing, and security operations teams are going to not only have to manage existing infrastructure, but as the Internet of Things and industrial Internet of Things, normally an air-gapped and separate network, these will start to be combined in some capacity. But really what is the security operations team will be asked to protect both environments, right? And so that's becomes very difficult because it is something completely a different animal in terms of the operational data, industrial data. So you're getting a lot of structured and unstructured data. You think that you have a lot now, wait until this kind of combination starts to happen. And this is where we all need to start focusing, right? So you're going to get what you probably already get today, which are, hundreds of thousands of alerts, new documents that you've never seen before, executable files, processes that are running, scripts, macros, etc. You're getting hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of alerts from, if you've got a SIM or log management, something that is collecting alerts from all of the different products that you have deployed out in your environment. Now you're going to start to get into collection of data, threat prioritization data, or just data that your business needs. Because when you start to move into the industrial Internet of Things, you're going to start to get and have to monitor the performance, the safety of these larger devices. You have support tickets and incident response tickets that are coming in, both from a network perspective, your enterprise network, and as for managing these large industrial assets as well. And so you will have a tremendous amount of historical and time-sensitive data that you'll need to be able to quickly understand what's going on within the environment and where to prioritize and spend your time. That, I don't think, is anything new. So we've developed a couple of patented algorithms and created a couple of solutions that are shippable products, as well as some tools or platforms to help you integrate artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing into your environment. So what we're talking about today is DeepArmor, which is malware prediction, right? The ability to see something it's never seen before, classify it as malicious or benign before it does any damage, and allow you to block and quarantine, or just alert in certain policies and based on your environment. But the ability to sit at the endpoint like a traditional AV or IDS, IPS type of a technology to protect your Windows, your Mac, and your Linux systems. We also have a product called SparkPredict. This is more around the industrial Internet of Things, where it is taking sensor data from turbines, pumps, etc., and is able to predict when a particular part or the entire asset may fail. Instead of an hour heads up for your engineering team, you might now get a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even a few months, with about 95, 96% accuracy, right? So the ability to plan for outages, to plan for downtime, etc. We have two platforms. One is Deep NLP, natural language processing, which basically is document classification, taking millions and millions of pages of text. It could be trouble tickets, it could be anything written, graphs, charts, etc., and being able to pull out the key information contextually based on questions that you ask, or the ability to kind of set up tabular formats where you're automatically pulling key information and the right information very quickly into tabular formats. That's just one use case of Deep NLP. And then finally, we have Darwin, which was first an internal tool our data scientist teams used to accelerate the data science process. And what this is, it's automated model building, what allows you to take your own data sets, both structured and unstructured, time series, etc., and automate the first 5 to 6 steps of the data science problem. Data scientists are very expensive and very rare. This is not business analytics. This isn't BI. This is truly looking at data and utilizing it for prediction. And so basically it will help with the ingestion of the data, cleaning, handling missing data, feature extraction or characteristics of the data that you need to help make your prediction, and then running it through hundreds, if not thousands of algorithms to the end generation to find the right combination or the right algorithm that is best for that particular data set to help you predict whatever problem you're trying to solve for. And so that's what Darwin does. So you can see we've got a combination of both solution and platforms. And what do we use that for? Well, various things. Client churn, so it doesn't have to be cybersecurity related. It could be air quality and weather patterns, as you see here, employee attrition, home credit default risk, what have you, right? It's whatever the data set is containing, the ability to help create algorithms to help you predict, future events. Okay, this slide I use in every single presentation because it is 100% applicable, which is why are we still being breached? Why do we need to start to look at artificial intelligence and machine learning? It's because the adversaries are masking, obviously, the previous attacks, previous malware used, where they're mutating it 1, 2, 3 times. They may be polymorphic in nature, where they're switching per machine as it lands on. It could be single-use malware, right, where it's never been seen before. It's going to be used once in a very focused attack. Trusted application attacks. This is what you hear from in-memory SQL injection attacks, PowerShell scripting attacks. Something that adversary will use on an existing system. And then finally, adversaries, do not kid yourself, have already started utilizing machine learning and various aspects of artificial intelligence to quickly work at scale and find ways to bypass traditional technology, right? So at Black Hat, I think the white hat hackers were asked, how easy is it to bypass current firewall, IDS, IPS, and 88% said unbelievably easy, right? So the traditional tools that we have in our environment, are they worthless? Absolutely not. But the point being is adversaries are getting so good at masking their technology or their attacks that traditional technologies, attack signatures, file reputation isn't the best way to handle this any longer. Right, you can see at the bottom, 70% of the organizations out there from an antivirus perspective don't think that their product is working well enough. So why utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning? Those are tools to be able to be used where you cannot scale, where it has become impossible for humans to scale. And I will tell you this flat out, your IT team, being small or mid-sized or just never the size that you would like it to be due to budget, expertise available, and so on, right? There's a negative unemployment rate in the cybersecurity world. You will not be able to scale, nor will your tools, right? They were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But if you kind of look at this progression of the threat information and data that I'm going to provide here, this will kind of tell you that a human is no longer the right tool to sit and watch, 244 new threats per minute, right? A 22% growth in malware from, 2016 to 2017. I don't have the 2018 numbers yet. So of those attacks, 46% were malware based, right? So of that, 30% are 0 day, so they've never been seen before. So your traditional technologies just haven't been taught yet to see them. And, again, it's always important to understand that, a lot of the attacks are from people living off the land, right, that have already gained entrance to your environment, probably via stolen credentials or a phish sometime in the past. And are looking and waiting and trying to understand what is important data that they can exfiltrate. So Pat Gelsinger at VMware just had a speech where, we need to change the cybersecurity world, where we're showing, and I don't know if that is showing poorly on your screen, it is on mine, but the average number of security products in an average company is 75. That is way too many, right? And it's because they're very specific solution sets. They're very rigid. They solve a particular problem. And this is another area where machine learning will promise to use cognitive analytics to be able to mimic what a tool might be able to do, or your resources, or your personnel resources. A lot of you are dealing with 10 to 50,000 alerts a day, right? And that just is unsustainable, and that continues to grow. We've had companies, and I'm sure this number goes well over 150,000 depending on the size, right? But this just is data that is no longer addressable by your SOC or your analyst team. If it takes 20 to 30 minutes per alert investigation, right, you can see that the numbers just don't match up. And the problem with these hundreds of thousands of alerts per day is most are incorrectly labeled because the products out there that you have are very, again, don't have a tremendous amount of smarts. It is, threshold based, it's attack signature based, etc. And so a lot of the alerts that come in are mislabeled. And you spend 50% of your time on, finding out, are these real? And most turn out to be insignificant or non-issues, right? And that's just not a great use of your IT team's staff or time. These are perfect applications for machine learning. So, are we focused correctly? Right, so you can kind of see the different kind of threat actors. Left to right is drive-by to general opportunistic, organized crime, and the farther you get to the right, the farther or the more damage it could possibly create, as well as usually their expertise or complexity also grows as you move left from right, right? And so if you talk to the cybersecurity market, this is where all the advertising and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt is around, right? Is now the big threat hunting, the big, you have to have a SIM to have complete visibility of your entire environment. You need to be doing your own detection and remediation. I would tell you this is the wrong area to be focused on, right? The reason why they're the big push here, and it will be at RSA next year, is that there is just, these are the products that they are now selling, the traditional tools that companies already have deployed. This is kind of the big focus area where people think there are significant gaps, and there are. But I would venture to say that 99% of your problems are drive-by to insider threat. Now, am I saying you don't have to protect against elite hackers and nation states? No. I'm telling you that they are so complex and so fast-moving that your team is probably not best geared to be hunting for them, right? So, of the 99% problems, we talked again about 48% of that's malware and 30% of that is zero-day, but there are so many other vectors that you need to protect yourself against before, in my mind, you are concentrating on elite hackers and nation states and doing your own threat hunting, right? By doing, and I say this to all of our clients, whether, and this is not, these aren't our products that we sell, but if you are doing patching better than you are today, if you've got a very good solution or process around privilege escalation management, if you have multi-factor authentication throughout your environment, not just on your most important applications, if your network isn't flat and it is segmented, whether it's through software-defined networking, right, the ability to kind of wall off certain areas, and so that it makes it very difficult for someone living off the land to move from one to another. And then employing real artificial intelligence and machine learning. Right. Again, I said at the beginning of the presentation that most of your cybersecurity vendors and everyone at RSA will say we are an artificial intelligence machine learning company. We've been here for 2 years, or we've offered this for 2 years. But I'm telling you, the legacy technology and bolting on kind of a machine learning or bolting on algorithms isn't very strong, and we'll talk about that here in the next slide. So what are we calling, what are we calling for? Obviously, we need to reduce the number of security vendors, and that should sound odd coming from a security vendor. But the way you do that is leveraging machine learning at machine scale, right? And leveraging and looking more towards third-party experts to do the threat hunting, to maybe manage your SIM, to help you with detection and remediation. My focus, or the way I would start a CISO organization, so to speak, would be to spend, again, most of the time, money, resources on privilege escalation management, patching, multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, and utilizing machine learning in various cases to help me leverage my team. So if you look at it another way, right, I think in essence, you're very similar to a small country trying to keep up with a world superpower in an arms race. So if you were Latvia or Estonia, for instance, would you be trying to match army size or their capabilities, number of fighter jets, tanks, etc.? But that's what we're all doing, right? As we try to protect ourselves against this big cybersecurity marketing with the nation states. So China, Russia, Iraq, Syria, North Korea, right? And that is important. And those are very dangerous adversaries. And they do have thousands of people in their cyber armies dedicated to looking for holes in different environments. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, again, protect against them or be worried about them, but just the security industry, I think, has over-rotated to this as the main problem and where you should be spending your time and money, because that's what they're selling. So if you're not focused on the big picture and you're focused more on the one or two individuals from entering your country, right, as a spy, and not prioritizing the general border control for the masses, if you take care of the general border control, you protect yourself from 99% of the threats and make it much harder for those 1 to 2, very capable spies that are very difficult to find. So what will scale? Taking advantage of compute power that we now have available to us and at relatively low cost, right, is now starting to allow you to use true machine learning as the right tool to fix certain problems. So just like any other tool, though, there are different levels of effectiveness. For instance, you could buy a new enhanced, top-of-the-line air filter for your home HVAC systems, and it'll help, absolutely. But it still could be allowing a lot of air particles, dangerous air particles that shouldn't, because the technology still isn't good enough, or it's not looking for the next, generated type of air particle that it needs to protect against. It would need a lot of time and resources to do R&D to fix and to find that particular new air particle. So it's very similar to what AV vendors are adding with their AI and ML and kind of bolting that on. They're using publicly available algorithms that can help identify anomalies, and it does help, but they weren't built specifically for this purpose, and that's what's most important, right, is utilizing machine learning at the edge to be able to reverse engineer at machine scale malware specifically, right? And so we have a patent around that. I'll kind of speak to that here in the next couple of slides. So again, going back to the HVAC, right? It's like buying general filters from Home Depot and Lowe's. You can continue to do that, but with new technology, and if you're worried about the full spectrum of harmful gases and gases that would be created down the road, you would absolutely, would you trust the standard or the generic technology in that industry, or would you look for something that's much more dedicated to that? The other analogy is testing for steroids. The adversaries funded unbelievably and incented to stay a couple of steps ahead of the testing, right? And so the standard quo and working with the same slow-moving vendors is kind of like bringing a new steroid test to the Tour de France and catching some, but most, especially the most smart and well-funded teams can bypass that and continue to dope. Whoops, before I jump there. So where are good places to enable machine learning? And we have around malware detection and prevention with our DeepArmor enterprise solution. We'll talk about that. but it could be around threat prioritization. There are so many alerts that come in and threat intelligence and so on. You should be looking for third parties that can help you with that by utilizing their own created algorithms to help prioritize and figure out where you take your limited staff and where you focus. Same thing as we talked about before around threat hunting and network anomalies. It's just very difficult to find that needle in the haystack, especially if the adversaries are very strong. This is where you need to find third-party experts. These are places where you need to outsource and make sure those outsourced vendors absolutely have strong capabilities around machine learning and deep learning. So getting into a couple more numbers, and again, you don't have to memorize these. We'll have the presentation generally available. But $5 million is the cost, and I think that I've heard that, through various vendors and various conferences is kind of the known cost for an endpoint security attack, right? You see the 77% of the cyber attacks were new or unknown, right? 350,000 new variants are created each day. That equates down to the 244, threats per minute. And I would venture to say that more than 53% of their organizations feel inadequate. Now, we also have seen a number of reports that say that a lot of companies are just too overconfident. Because they can't see it, they are assuming that they are blocking it and are preventing. And that's a worry as well. So let's talk a little bit about DeepArmor and why we have developed this technology. So the challenge 3 years ago was, how do you predict? Meaning, how do you get away from the reactive, right? So traditional tools, whether they be firewall, IDS, IPS, AV, etc., host-based firewall, what have you, is very reactionary. It needs, and it's built on historical data, which is fine and was fine 5 years ago, but it no longer is because of the things that we kind of talked about on why people are still being breached. It's very easy to bypass attack signatures or file reputation by making the smallest change to the code, and now the product can no longer see it. And so you have to wait, and you're kind of at the mercy of the security industry or your particular vendor from finding it at a patient zero, understanding what it is, reverse engineering it, creating a definition file, pushing that, testing it, pushing it out to their general install base, and then you have to test it and push that out. And again, I can't imagine that anyone thinks that this is going to scale in the future. So we've built a cognitive agent that strips away everything that is known and learns about the particular endpoint that it sits on, what the processes are that are running, what files are already there. And as new files, new executables, downloaded executables, new scripts and macros are run or asked to be run on those particular machines, right? The ability for us to strip away things that we've already seen, or the general security industry has already seen via file reputation, and then running these unknown files, documents, executables through an algorithm at the endpoint, so it'll work whether you're connected to a network or not, and be able to classify it correctly with a very low number of false positives. And we particularly see the difference between first and second generation technology that's out there today and what we are developing, or have developed and have released, excuse me, is a huge gap around malware that's less than 24 hours old. So that's something that I'll show you here in 2 slides, I believe, where if you're just throwing brand new pieces of malware at everyone's static file detection engine that includes their AI and ML capabilities, you will see a huge difference in the ability to understand what they're seeing and classify it correctly. After a couple of days, after a couple of weeks, everyone gets updated product or definition files, and you now can see those, but a lot of times that's way too late, especially around ransomware. So we have patented technology for malware extraction. We have let AI tell us what characteristics of the code, so we're not looking at file or in the payload, we are looking at code level analysis, entropy of the file, strings, metadata, and so on. And depending on the file type, we are pulling 20 to 25,000 features or characteristics that we've let our other algorithms tell us what's most important, right? And so we've come at this a different way. We feel like we're the kind of the Tesla of electric cars, where we've built it from scratch and we don't have existing cars or engines that we have to modify or bolt on to create a hybrid automobile. So DeepArmor endpoint protection does a couple of things. Number one, it's multi-vector protection. So for file-based executables, things that are written to disk, for fileless attacks like weaponized documents that may have a script or macro similar, probably downloaded via phishing, as well as in-memory attacks and specifically PowerShell, right? So if people are trying to run malicious scripts inside of PowerShell, the ability for us to investigate and make that determination. And again, we are completely focused on pre-execution. So before even sandboxes, right, or other technologies, the goal here is to predict if something's going to be malicious or not with a very high accuracy rate, to reduce the number of things that you'll then have to go manage or investigate on the back end. So we're not using any signatures or YAR rules. Most of the next generation vendors that claim full AI are utilizing YAR rules and places to update their product when their model doesn't see everything. We don't do control features. That's how a lot of products will look at stopping macro and script-based attacks. They'll just turn off or use the device control to say, we're not going to allow any scripts or macros to run. And that obviously could affect your end user use case or ability to do their work. So here is multi-vector protection across the board. It looks like my slide is coming up a little bit lame here, but the difference here is the difference between traditional antivirus, next-gen antivirus, and what DeepArmor is bringing to the market. And so if you look all the way to the right-hand side, we are the first company that is using only artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning to handle zero-day malware attacks, script, macro, and document attacks completely via machine learning, right? So it allows, these models allow you to not have to update these on a daily basis. We update our models once a quarter. So here's some of the numbers that have made us so passionate about what we're doing and where we see the differences. So if you look on the left-hand side, again, utilizing malware that's less than 24 hours old, right? The ability to look at the comparison between the next-gen products as well as the traditional antivirus products, and to show there still is a huge gap. They still struggle mightily with looking at a file they've never seen before, which most adversaries can easily do and to create, right? And their efficacy drops pretty significantly. And if you look on the right-hand side, this is, I changed the names to protect, the innocent, but you can see from a first or second generation, there is a huge gap here. And the difference between 88% and 99%, well, okay, great. It may not seem that much, but in a mid-size environment, it could be tens to hundreds of thousands of missed files a day, right? And that's why companies are still being breached, frankly. So let's take a case study, and then that'll kind of end, the presentation. But the GandCrab ransomware that came out a little bit ago, when that came out, we immediately determined how many of the products could see it. And just using, so you can see that little 41 or 40 out of 61, only 40 out of 61 could see that that was a problem, right? So if you had one of the other 20 some odd products that were out there for this particular alert or this particular threat, you would have a very high rate of being affected by this ransomware, right? And so on the left-hand side just kind of shows you what it did and so on. But what did DeepArmor do? We actually caught it in 2 different places for 2 different vectors. So first, it came in an unknown Word document, which we detected with our real-time file monitoring. The malicious script was detected, and it was quarantined. For whatever reason, if you just had that on alert, and for documents, that could be a policy that you decide. For the unknown process that was frozen under execution control, it wouldn't allow that ransomware to run, right? And so the ability, without ever having seen this before, the ability to correctly classify it as malicious and stop it. Now, every vendor can say the same thing about a particular threat. All I can say is we have tested brand new malware on a daily basis for the last 14 months. And these numbers are very similar. They're different vendors, every threat, because different vendors can see different things. But for the most part, they are only accurate to about 75, 76%. And that is the significance and why this is a perfect example and a perfect use case to enable machine learning to handle the millions of threats that are coming, that are here now and that are coming, and the ability to do that, reverse engineer at machine scale without human intervention. So with that, I will say thank you for attending. We kept it right at around 42 minutes, which is kind of the goal. If there's any other questions, feel free to email me at rpither, you can see that at the bottom, at SparkCognition.com, or via my mobile at 512-688-7328. I am, hopefully you can tell, super passionate about this space. What is, you know, some good recommendations I'm happy to address outside even of DeepArmor. But we have free trials available at SparkCognition.com, and looking under the DeepArmor product, there's a free 15-day trial that you can access and look for yourself. You can install it right behind your traditional antivirus or next-gen product, as long as there's only one other. If there's 2, then there could be some conflicts. But if you have a traditional AV, this is a great way to kind of install it right behind it and really understand what your current technology is missing. So again, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. And I'll be looking for your questions. Thanks so much.